So with inductive arguments, we definitely want them to have a strong form if we are going to be convinced by them. But that evaluating the strength means assuming that the premises are true and seeing if the conclusion seems likely to be true. But in addition to having a strong form, we also need the premises to actually be all true. Okay, and so what we're ultimately looking for there is what we would call cogency. Okay, a cogent argument is one that is strong plus all true premises. And that's really what we are after with an inductive argument. Those are the arguments we would want to be convinced by as good critical thinkers. An uncogent argument, one way that it might be uncogent is that it has a weak form. So the premises don't actually infer a likely true conclusion. But an uncogent argument might also be strong in its form with one or more false premises. Okay, so essentially the two-step process is to, one, check for strength. If you find that the argument is weak, then it's uncogent and you're done. But if you find that the argument is strong, then check for truth value of premises. Okay, and so you need your argument to be strong and check off that step, and then it also needs to have all true premises. Let's look at some examples. Okay, let's say that the premise is Joan accidentally left the oven on with the pie in it. And our conclusion is that the pie is burned. Okay. This is an inductive argument because we don't know for sure that the pie burned, okay? But it seems very likely that if the pie was left in the oven for 2 hours, that it would burn. It's a causal inference, and based on the past and cause and effect relationships that we have witnessed in the past, it seems very likely that this pie will have burned. Okay, and so assuming that the premise is true, I would expect the conclusion to be true as well, while acknowledging that there might be some strange occurrence, some what philosophers might call a black swan event, where for some reason the pie didn't burn this time. Okay, but that would be incredibly surprising. So I would say that it passes the test of strength. I would say, one, it's a strong argument in terms of its form. The premise, if true, infers a probably true conclusion, so it's strong. The second step will be to check for cogency, so I would want to see if the premise was actually true. Let's suppose that there is a situation where that happened, okay? And so this is a true premise. Well, then it would pass that second step, and we would call it not only strong, but cogent, okay? Now, if it turned out that this was a lie, and Joan did not accidentally leave the oven on, and with the pie burning on it, well, then that would mean that while it has a strong form, because if the premise was true, the conclusion's likely true, it would no longer be cogent, it would be uncogent for having a false premise. All right. So it's a two-step process. Now let's consider another case. And this says every map created of the US shows Florida alongside the Pacific Ocean. And then my conclusion is that Florida is a western state. Okay. Now, why is this an inductive argument? Because maps are human-made artifacts, and humans can make mistakes. There can be printing errors. Maps can't, they can't be trusted to, be by definition always conveyors of the truth. So we need to use some inductive reasoning skills when we interpret a map. But maps tend to be accurate, and the more maps we engage with that are accurate, the more likely it is that they give us accurate information. So I would say that, assuming that the premise is true, that this would give us good reason to think that the conclusion is also true. So I would say that it passes that step of being a strong argument. It has a strong form to it. Okay, and so that means I have to go on to my second step and consider whether the premise is actually true. And of course, Florida is, alongside the Atlantic Ocean, not the Pacific Ocean. This is a false claim right there. And so we would say that this is an uncogent argument, not for its form, but for having a false premise in it. All right. Now let's consider a weak argument. And weak arguments are always, by definition, uncogent. So let's look at another, like a bad appeal to authority, a fallacy. And we'll say my philosopher teacher says, let's say that George Washington was the first U.S. president. Therefore, George Washington was the first U.S. president. Okay, so this argument is weak because it's an appeal to authority. What the conclusion is saying is that this conclusion is likely true because of where I got my information from about George Washington. I got my information from my philosophy teacher. Well, my philosophy teachers are not experts in U.S. history. Okay, it doesn't mean that what they say about U.S. history is false, but we wouldn't want to trust what they say on their word, like on the basis of their expertise, because they don't have expertise in that field. So we might believe what they say, but we would want to verify it with alternative sources, history books, history teacher, someone who would have the authority to speak on the matter. So this argument, while it has a true premise and its conclusion is true, okay, it still is weak because we shouldn't accept the conclusion to be true on the basis of this premise. We would need additional support. So assuming this premise is true doesn't really give me an over 50% chance that this conclusion is true. Okay, so we would call this argument weak for committing a fallacy, a fallacious appeal to authority by citing someone's authority who doesn't really have authority in the matter. Okay, and any argument that is weak, even though it has true claims, okay, just the fact that it has a bad form makes it uncogent. Okay, so this would not be a persuasive argument. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. The way that we evaluate deductive arguments by testing the form and then considering whether the premises are true, is really analogous to how we evaluate inductive arguments. We first start with the form of the inductive argument, and then we go on to consider whether the premises are actually true or false. Unless, the argument is weak, then it's uncogent. We don't have to go to that second step, really. Just like with a deductive argument, if it's invalid, if it has a bad form, then we would call it unsound.